So this is day 2 of painting my Mandala color wheel. So this is what I had done yesterday. So this is now completely dry. So it is safe for me to now paint my tertiary intermediate wedges. These are the wedges between a primary and secondary color. And they're the colors with the hyphenated name. So red and violet make red violet, or red purple. Purple and blue make blue purple, or blue violet. So I'm going to go around the color wheel, and I have my color wheel we created in class in front of me, and I'm going to mix my colors and apply them to my color wheel. So I have the same setup as I did yesterday. I have my set of watercolor paints, I have my brush bin with cold water, and I have a couple of paintbrushes off to the side here. You also notice now that I have another small bowl. These are bowls that I have a few of at the sinks. And since I'm going to be working with 6 different colors, from experience before of just doing the 3 primary and the 3 secondary, my bowl of water got very dirty. So I had to change it after just 3 colors. So I'm going to use this small bowl as my source of clean water, and I'm going to clean out my brushes in the brush bin. I also have my plate for mixing, so I'm about to begin. So my first step is I do want to get my colors activated, and since I'm going to be working again with all 6 colors, I'm going to put a few drops of water into each of my colors. So this can be something that you do before you even get, excuse me, this is something you can do to your watercolor set at the beginning. So what I would suggest is when you set up your work area that you go ahead and get your water, your paper towels, and your paint set. You go ahead and start activating those colors, and then gather up your plate and last your project. You always want to bring your project to the table last, because in that way, if, as I demonstrated yesterday, you are passing things over top of it, or your fellow classmates at your table are moving about, there's less chance of something dropping on here or dripping on here. It's also the reason why it's one of the first things we take off of our work surface when we clean up. So these are still semi-wet from yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead and begin. So I'm going to start here between my red and my orange, and I'm going to make my red orange. So I'm going to get my paintbrush wet, take a little bit of that excess water off of there, and I'm going to first dip into my orange paint, and I'm going to bring some of that over to my plate. And I'm going to clean out my paintbrush, dry it off, and I'm going to pick up some of my red paint and bring it also over to my plate. Now whenever you mix colors, you never want to take from your main paint source to your palette and just start dropping things into each other. You want to be able to control how much paint you are mixing into other colors. So in this case, orange is lighter than red, so I'm going to add red to my orange to start making my red-orange color. So I'm definitely going to need a little bit more a little bit more water on these to thin these out a little bit more. And I'm going to pick up some of my red and bring it over to my orange. And remember yesterday I had mentioned that we have this little extra space at the bottom of our paper that is going to be eventually cut off. So as I get close to a red-orange color I like, I'm going to test it first. I'm going to pick up a little bit more red, bring it over to my orange. I'm going to give it a little swatch. So what I'm looking for is a color that is in between my red that is purely out of the set and my orange color. So that is darker than my orange, but remember my orange is also applied through the wet on wet technique. And what the wet on wet technique does is it dilutes your paints even further. So by the time I add water here for the wet on wet technique, this may be still very close to that. So I think I'm going to go ahead and add some more red to just up that red color in my red-orange intermediate or tertiary color I'm trying to make here. So I'm going to try that. Now if after this dries, it does not have the same, how do I want to put this? If it doesn't have the color exactly I want for red-orange, then I can always go back and repaint over top of it. But I'm going to go with that for now. So I've cleaned out my paintbrush. I'm now getting some water onto here. And just like yesterday, I'm going to wet my wedge. And now that I'm painting in between wedges that are dry, this is where painting technique really comes into play. I want to try to keep my water just into this wedge and not over into my primary or secondary color. So again, I'm looking for that glossy texture on my paper. And once I have that, then I'm going to come in with my red-orange color and start applying it. So again, that can be done in a solid wash or a gradient. So now that I have that, I'm going to do this to all of my intermediate or tertiary colors, and then I'm going to mix them on my plate. If necessary, I will eventually clean off my plate if I run out of room for mixing colors. But again, I have this bottom area to test out my colors first. And I'm going to keep to the same exact thing I did yesterday. Since I used all wet on wet techniques with my primary and secondary colors, then any tertiary intermediate color I mix up, I want to still work with the wet on wet technique. So I'm going to do that. So I now have my intermediate tertiary colors painted, and they have had time to dry since I last recorded. So as you can see, I still have my setup for painting. I now no longer need my small bowl of water for clean water, because the only thing I really have to paint now is to touch up that blue wedge that I discussed with you earlier. So I have my plate that I've cleaned off. I have my paints, and I've already added some drops of water to my blue. And what I'm going to do is, just like before, I'm going to pick up some of that blue paint and bring it to my plate, because again, I want to be able to control how much water I place into this color. And I can do that better on another surface than within the pan itself. So I'm going to clean out my paintbrush, and I'm going to now re-wet my entire blue wedge. And even just the act of this may even out that spot. And you can see there that they've already kind of started to disappear. But I'm going to go ahead and re-wet the entire thing and just add another thin layer of blue over top, because you'll see that my paintbrush is getting a blue tint to it, because anytime you work with watercolor and you come back over top of an area that's already been painted, all you're doing is reactivating the paint that is on the surface. So it is going to lift, it is going to soften, and I may be able to move this around, but I'm adding more water to it. So as it dries, it's going to lighten up some. So that's why I want to come in and just add a little bit more blue over top so that it doesn't get too faded when it finishes drying. So again, I've wet the whole entire wedge. So now it's just like working with wet on wet paper again. And I'm just coming in with another layer of blue over top. Again, just so it doesn't fade out when it dries. So if you have any touch-ups to do, those are your two options. One, you just re-wet the entire wedge, and it should get rid of any spots you may have in your paint. Or two, re-wet it and apply more paint to it. So now I'm going to let this dry. So this will now go over to the drying rack. I will again clean up my entire work area. I will wash and dry my plate and store it in my folder for now. My watercolor set, again, I will close up and carefully transfer it back into its storage bin. Again, I want to keep it horizontal, and I'm going to clean up my work area. And in our next video, we're now going to work with stamping our mandala design onto our color wheel. And I will demonstrate that the next time I talk to you.